Welcome everyone to this very exciting session. We're very excited to be here in this lounge at the Division 52 at the American Psychological Association Convention for 2020. Of course, we'd have loved to be in beautiful DC, but we are having to do this from our lovely country of Kenya. It's really great and innovative. So as we begin this program, I'd like to introduce the chair of our program to give a bit of an introduction of what the program is about and to also start us off with our presentation for today. The chair of this program is Dr. Dana Basnight-Brown, who is the chair of our program, as I've mentioned. She's an associate professor of psychology at USIU Africa, and she's the director and the co-founder of the Center for Cognitive and Developmental Research, and she's the associate director of the Psychological Science Accelerator, which is part of the Global Laboratory Network. Thank you so much, and Dr. Basnight-Brown, please.
Thank you. It's great to be with all of you today, and I think you'll enjoy this series of speakers who are talking on the theme of theory and practice of psychology here in Kenya. So there's a lot of exciting psychological advancements happening in the East African region, with Kenya leading the way through a lot of their graduate programs and research endeavors. But there's also several challenges before those who are working in various sectors in the psychological domain. So we're joined today by several alumni of United States International University located in Nairobi, as well as some of our current doctoral students. So I think you will enjoy hearing from each of them. Currently in Kenya, there's a need for an increase in the number of mental health practitioners. That's probably one of the biggest challenges before us and one of the most, the largest area of opportunity for professionals in this area. And so today you will hear from 4 of them who are working in very diverse sectors, as well as our moderator, Dr. Githua, as well. And you will get to learn from some of their experiences as they share the state of psychology in this region.
To speak to us is a personal friend, a very astute psychologist, and one of the greats amongst us. And her name is retired Major Lucy Warimu. She is a counseling psychologist by training, but then she's become a military psychologist by practice. And she's also been very involved in working in the area of policy and legal framework when it comes to the rights of the veterans in this country, especially in the area of trauma.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Dr. Githua. And I shall be talking about state-sponsored laws and policies for healing war-related trauma among Kenyan military veterans and our families. So, trauma-informed means developing policies and laws that reflect an understanding on how the traumatized have had their lives go off course due to the very specific life experiences. Trauma-informed policy and lawmaking involves translating to legislators how military veterans and our families who are traumatized have had their life experiences and expectancy limited as a result of acts of service in the protection of the Kenyan people and her territories from external aggressors. So what do we mean when we are talking about military veterans, state-sponsored care and protection? What is the current situation? The best place to begin is to note that Kenya does not have a military veterans policy or law. The closest references that we have is the Mental Health Act, which is currently under revision. And we should have a revised act when it happens. We also have the Defense Forces Medical Insurance Scheme. This is also known as DEFMIS, and it is a medical insurance scheme that we invest in during our service years, and it pays off once we become veterans till the time of our our death, and it covers the individual who was in active service and their spouse for life, and four children who are under the age of 21. So it's a co-shared sort of arrangement. Then we have the Disability Act. So the Mental Health Act, like I said, is being revised because it was created to protect citizens from people who suffer from mental illness. It was also structured in a way where it's supposed to punish those suffering from mental illness with the same law that punishes criminals. So this is what we mean when we say, for example, that the current law for mental health, the act itself, criminalizes mental illness, and that is why it's under review. Secondly, we have the Defense Forces Medical Insurance Scheme, like I said, also known as DEFMIS, and through its trust deed, it outrightly dismisses undertaking any financial undertaking for any military veteran who requires mental health services. So you can see the problem with that, because the work in itself actually does result to psychological difficulties that require care. Finally, there is the Disability Act, and in itself, it requires that any military veteran requiring the benefits of coming under its care and protection to have been declared as suffering from psychological disability right from discharge from the military. And the fact is that the military will only provide proof of disability on physical limitation, not psychological ones. So you see, there is a way in which that system excludes military veterans and our families who are suffering from psychological difficulties from being able to, by law, get care and protection. So what is the history and what is the future? The revision of the old and the creating of new policies and laws serves to alter practices that have historically been complicit in the denial, the oppression, and the advancement of hurt to sufferers. Also important to note is that the old policies, the old laws, had very little to do with the voices of the sufferers and the contribution they had to make as to what they thought would be of benefit for them, would be of protection for them, would advance their own care. So complemented by the existence of an active monitoring and evaluation segment that hopefully will be able to engage both policy and practice consistently, it will influence an evolution for both, thus improving the outcomes for military veterans. And really, this is what we are hoping for. This is the past that we are hoping to leave behind, and this is the future where we are hoping to embrace, where there is an interaction between policy and practice, and each is having a symbiotic effect on the other. And this was the reasoning behind the True North's petition read on the Senate floor on the 1st of August in 2019. The objective was to compel the legislative arm of government to support the enactment of a military veterans law. Ultimately, the expectation is to have policies and laws that influence practice, leading to the promotion of healing, care, and protection of military veterans and our families. So what lessons have been learned thus far? A year on, verily, I must admit to you that passion, facts, figures, compelling survivors' accounts of military veterans and our families, plus a host of notable supporting petitioners, supporting our petitions, such as Amnesty International and the media, may have gotten us through the front door, but all those do not create a sense of urgency for the process of policy and lawmaking to deliver a military veterans law within a reasonable period of time. Secondly, the legislative process is an emotional process triggering painful traumas and pain. It creates hope, it seeds doubt and uncertainty, it causes delusion, it elicits joy and excitement. So it's a roller coaster. Bullet 3, the legislative process is not autonomous. It is subject to the political maneuvers of the executive. And right now there is a shakeup happening politically in this country, and it has affected the committee members of the respective committees in the Senate and in the House, and that also includes the Committee for Labor and Social Protection, under which our petition fell. Lastly, during this time of COVID-19 pandemic, a new challenge has been presented. Due to the personal and public considerations, convening of meetings by the Committee of Labor and Social Protection has been greatly impacted. This has further contributed in the deeming of the timely delivery of the Military Veterans Law. In conclusion, therefore, I would like to say that trauma-informed policies and laws through a legislative process using military veterans and our families can be the blueprint that can address trauma for all due to its holistic and representative compositions of Kenyans involved. Trauma is a public health issue, and there is potential to cultivate a culture of healing and restoration in practice and in policy that is hoped for everybody in this country. So thank you very much.
But thank you so much for that. Our next speaker is Mary Kitaka, also a good friend and an astute psychologist. Mary is a psychologist, clinical psychologist who works at the True North Society, and she supports military veterans to reintegrate into society after their service. She was involved very intimately with supporting people of the terror attack 14 Riverside in Nairobi. She has also worked to support victims of torture as well as refugees from the countries of Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, and Uganda. She has basically worked in the hardest and harshest environments in this part of the world, of the Horn and East Africa, supporting survivors of trauma, especially the acts of war and other violent acts. At this point, please let me welcome Mary Kitaka.
Thank you for that very generous introduction, Dr. Oscar, who we've also worked with closely. So I'll be talking about psychological trauma and critical incidents in this part of the world. And what challenges do we face as mental health practitioners, and what opportunities do we have going forward? I'm a graduate of the United States International University and Montclair State University in New Jersey. So the first critical incident I'd like to talk about is just last year on January 15th. Many Kenyans or people around this region will remember that there was a terrorist attack that happened in a major business hub in the city, and 21 people died. 5 terrorists were killed by law enforcement, and this was, I would say, a time when the government really stepped in to support people from psychological injury, and this was done by the National Counterterrorism Center. Some of us here were involved in responding, and after that was done, in the initial critical incident, the True North Society took it up to support one of the companies that was really affected by the terrorist attack. And so we, the team of psychologists that we worked with, saw some things that were predominant in the clients that we were serving. Some of these were grief, survivor's guilt, because some of their colleagues had been killed in the attack. At some point, they had to adjust to a new working environment. They suffered from insomnia, migraine headaches, loss of appetite, worry, hypervigilance, a loss of concentration at work, at home, sadness and anger and nightmares. So someone might say that these are the usual, so to say, symptoms that we might see in in people when they faced a critical incident like a natural disaster or a man-made scary situation. So what are some of the things that we did to help these people who had gone through this really terrible thing? We were a team of 10 psychologists, all doctoral and master's level, with various specializations such as clinical psychology, counseling psychology, marriage and family therapy, industrial and organizational, and forensic. So most of the clients received SPR in group sessions, which were done by yours truly, which were 10 groups total. And at this point, I also would make referrals for individual sessions, so the clients were able to see the different psychologists. And the predominant treatment approach, when we look at our data, was CBT, which is common to all these practitioners in their training. And others included marriage and family therapy, existential therapy, and grief therapy. And so we had the clients for several months, but when we did an average of how many times the clients who came for individual therapy, we found that that was about 3 sessions. What are the challenges in terms of critical incidents? Because now we are faced with another extended incident. I call it an incident because we suspect that at some point down the road, we are going to be seeing symptoms of things like depression, anxiety, and PTSD because of what is going on with the COVID-19 pandemic. So the challenges we face as practitioners currently is this COVID-19 is restricting client access. We are not able to connect digitally with all clients. It's not all clients that have the opportunity to be on a Zoom call. So that is a big challenge. The other thing is past trauma. I just elucidated 2019, which is a very recent trauma. So we can only imagine what the people who had been in the terror attack are going through at this point. And then we can think about even other traumas, things that go on in the society, from intimate partner violence to child abuse to crime, and even other past incidents from maybe even 3, 5 years, 10 years ago that have never either been taken care of or they've never been taken care of. The other thing is stigma. We've been trying a lot as psychologists to fight stigma around mental health care, but this still persists. We are doing our best, but there's still some ways to go. The other thing is minimal or lacking knowledge of mental health and healthcare. So you find that many people may not have a good understanding of what mental health is or mental health care. So this means that they will not seek care because they don't have the knowledge of what that is. We are doing our best to try and educate the public through various channels, radio, social media. So it's a work in progress. The other thing is the cost for clients to seek treatment. Many people are not able to seek treatment even for other physical health issues. So many people may not have the funds to actually see a psychologist, especially one who's very, very highly trained. The other thing is because of what I just spoke about, people wait a long time before they seek treatment. It exacerbates the challenges they have. The other thing is even an unwillingness to pay for services. So even when someone may have the funds, mental health care is still not taken as seriously as physical illness. So that's an ongoing challenge. So what are the opportunities for psychologists in this part of the world? We feel that at this point in time during this pandemic, there's an opportunity for us to provide psychological support in partnership with whether it's government or other actors who can be able to fund such healthcare. Know that there is a need for mental health care, and there's also a growing number of psychologists who are training and who have already been in the field for a while. And then there's also these psychologists are very well trained, so they're able to provide evidence-based treatment. So I'll stop there for now. Thank you very much. I'll hand it over back to our moderator, Dr. Oscar.
Thank you so much, Mary, for that very good presentation. Our next speaker is Joyce Wangari Ngugi. She is a doctoral candidate at the United States International University in Africa and in the program of the Doctor of Psychology, Clinical Psychology. She is a consulting psychologist and a research mentor. She also did her MA and BA programs at USIU Africa. She is a great advocate for mental health in this country. She's done a lot of work. She holds monthly sessions, which are webinars to educate people in decolonizing psychology. She's also a student and a mentor in the arts, and she believes in using art therapy in healing arts. She is a great advocate as well for people who live with disabilities, and especially the deaf, where she's been a champion over a lot of years speaking to us. So today she'll be talking to us about the influence of media, especially in the role that they played in the post-election violence that we experienced in this country between the years of 2007 2008. For our listeners who might not understand the background of our country, Kenya's election cycle, especially the general elections, happen every 5 years. And around the period between the 5 years seemed to be relatively peaceful. And Kenya is known to be one of those peaceful countries, hosting a lot of UN bodies and other multinational corporations here. However, when it's election time, we seem to experience a phenomenon where there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of tribal clashes and things like those, leaving a lot of our population in a lot of trauma. So I think that Joyce will be able to tell us what the role of media is and what can we do really around this subject. So thank you so much, Joyce. Welcome.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Dr. Oscar Gidua. My name is Joyce Wangari Ngugi, and I am particularly interested in this topic because I am a Kenyan citizen, and Kenya, just like other East African countries and African countries, does have, presidential elections, national elections, county elections, and I'd just like to share what then happens when information, especially when information goes wrong. And so I'm going to be talking about media and trauma, particularly during the 5-year electioneering period, as you've had. So one of the inroads that I'm now beginning to get my feet in is I am the founder of an organization called Vira Communications, which is basically looking at media and communications, how we can improve information dissemination. And so in my other work where I work with the deaf, information is crucial. It's everything. And so I'm particularly interested in diversity and inclusion, as Dr. Gidua has said earlier. So I am reviewing literature on the traumatic effect of media shutdown on Kenyan television stations during the post-election crisis in the year 2017. This was the most recent, the last elections. There was a political crisis that led to post-election violence, and soon after, the government banned all local media stations in what they termed as the interest of peace and tranquility. So there was a 7 to 10 days ban. there was also a 7-minute delay after, the stations were allowed to broadcast again. But this time they were not doing it live. They had to have a 7-minute delay so that everything they were broadcasting was checked. Something else also happened. There seemed to be a big switch to digital media and mass media, and a lot of Kenyans embracing community-led platforms such as social media and creating their own news. That was a very innovative benefit of, the post-election crisis in Kenya. Upon media censorship, Kenya made global headlines instantly. There was a lot of international media now reporting on behalf of Kenya, since a lot of Kenyan local stations were shut down. And they created an infodemic. I'll be explaining that term that was coined by the WHO. So there was a lot of exaggeration of information, lies, half-truths, confabulation, fabrication, and misinformation and disinformation. But I spoke with a few friends of mine who are in the diaspora, and they were shocked at the kinds of news that were on the major, global outlets, and talking of a genocide. And we know that already in Kenya, we do have tribal polarities, especially these are augmented during election season and especially the election year. So a lot of misrepresentation, to the extent that some media stations actually apologized officially for having misrepresented the news. So I thought that was very interesting. And so we've explained infodemic. This was a term coined by the World Health Organization to just describe the new viral threat. So right now, just to bring into perspective, in the current COVID-19 pandemic, we do have another pandemic, which is an information pandemic around the COVID-19 pandemic. And there's actually a conference going on, just almost ending, First Global WHO Infodemiology Conference, which is going to create a community of practice around information. How can we adapt, develop, validate, evaluate evidence-based measures and practices to prevent, detect, and respond to misinformation and disinformation? So the WHO puts it so well. They say an infodemic cannot be eliminated sometimes, but it can be managed. So how do we relay information during a crisis? So that is a very interesting study that I'm doing. So the context of Kenyan media is that, as Dr. Kidua said, Kenya is valued by investors because it's relatively peaceful and we have a stable economic growth. We have about over 60 TV stations, over 130 radio stations, and numerous county and print media. There have been state-owned television and radio stations from independence in the year 1963 until the year 1990, when private organizations were now allowed to broadcast. So there has been a neoliberal, approach now to media, and that almost everyone nowadays can open a media station, really. So the problem with when media is not responsible is that graphic images can result in psychological trauma. The major contributor, especially when the media outlets want to replay this to rise up the ranks of popularity. We also know that journalism in itself has a very steep negative bias. So, there'll be a lot of replaying of these really horrible graphic scenes on television, especially which has both sight and sound, so very, very intense. And so I did a document analysis on various articles that were written by predominantly Kenyan authors, just analyzing the 2017 media shutdown. And as I said earlier, it brought about a lot of innovative community-led media, and there was an outcry by the population that we would like to return to patriotism and our national ideals of peace and cohesion and justice, obviously, so that we move beyond tribalistic polarization in Kenya. So the findings were that every 5 years, when we have our political electioneering period, we have cycles of pre-election trauma and anxiety. And there's a lot of witnessing and also experiencing of arrests, detentions, physical attacks, threat of violence, and rampant impunity. I mean, people walking the streets and breaking into shops and looting and things like that. And therefore, over the years, elections characterized by media ban on mainstream media have shown increased use of alternative media, such as social media, SMS, that's the short message service. And this is like a form of participatory journalism by the citizenry, which is a really interesting thing that citizens taking up for their own, responsible media and beginning to say what kinds of things they want to be shown over the mass media. Obviously, we have our Kenyan Constitution, Article 34, which talks on the role of media freedom and restricts the state from controlling or interfering with broadcast of information through any medium. However, during Kenya's post-election crisis, there were unprecedented direct and indirect traumatic impacts on the citizenry. So, in conclusion, after the television stations were shut down during the national election rerun, this was closely followed by an overall shift to more non-conventional digital platforms, and that was the main source of information sharing. This is crucial to note because citizens are now taking news into their own hands, and that's amazing. They're now beginning to shift the narrative on what are the things we need to dwell on so that we prevent violence and foster peace. Another conclusion is that there was an infodemic and overexposure of sensational graphic content. Not much of it was validated as true. It was not censored. So the question is, does knowing everything help? Must we show every gory detail? There's always a tension in the debate, even now in Kenya, about what to expose and what to conceal. All right, it all depends on what position you're taking and who controls what everybody knows. Do citizens have power to prevent violence through community empowerment in information dissemination? So the study recommends training more psychologists on trauma-informed interventions for large-scale trauma, especially for pre-election trauma and anxiety. We also need large-scale mental health support to care for the anxieties we have every 5-year cycle. It's now a dance, and you notice that sometimes even investors will leave the country when it's election. Yeah, so it's becoming very clear that we now have a pattern and we need to highlight the need for psychological interventions. So implications of the study are that we need nationwide trauma healing programs, like the kind that we witnessed in Rwanda, South Africa, truth, justice, and reconciliation for past survivors of post-election violence trauma. We also need to address media freedom alongside responsibility. So there's no such thing as absolute freedom. The media need to be responsible as an independent and unbiased watchdog in the process of democratization in Kenya. Thirdly, Kenya needs to learn from its history, memories, heritage, and all this innovation, the new technological age, so that we are always ready. Right now, we are looking to 2022 for the next election, but is the citizenry ready for peaceful electioneering, or are we waiting for a replay of what has happened in every other past election, right? And then lastly, another implication is that violence prevention needs to involve media professionals who would benefit from training on trauma-informed reporting. So if we inculcated trauma-informed knowledge and what would constitute responsible media coverage, then we would, prevention is better than cure. We would prevent a lot of the trauma before it even happens. So thank you very much, and those are some references.
Thank you so much, Joyce, for that very great presentation. All right, so moving on right along, our next speaker, presenter is Bernice Derito, and Bernice is a doctoral candidate at USIU. She's enrolled in the clinical psychology program, just about to wind up. And she's a psychotherapist. She's also an MHPSS specialist. She's a consultant. She's a child development specialist. She's a social science researcher. and she has over 11 years of experience in consulting in these areas. And she's especially concerned in the idea of psychological assessment, psychotherapy, technical writing, and project management. Basically, Bernice is a professional in psychology, and she has a lot to offer. Her topic that she's going to be talking about is one that Division 52 would probably be very interested about, and especially in examining the cross-cultural experience of a student.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, for that great introduction. So yeah, so I'll be sharing my experience about like my internship experience. I did my internship in the U.S. From September 2018 to August 2019. Yeah, so basically, I was talking about my experience, and I'll talk about the internship site, I'll talk about the actual experience and kind of compare it between Kenya and the US, the skills that I learned, the lessons that I learned, and the recommendations. I have some recommendations for internship sites, for university institutions, and also for students as well. So basically, I did my internship at an organization called CARES. So CARES is Community Assistance Resources and Extended Services. It's a nonprofit based in New York City, offering services to all 5 boroughs of New York. It's an Article 16 and an Article 31 clinic, meaning that it serves persons with developmental disabilities, and it also serves persons with mental health disorders as well. So it's licensed, or it has operating licenses for both those clinics. And so this particular site that I went to is APIC accredited, and it offers both predoctoral and postdoctoral internship programs. So while I was there, we had a postdoc intern as well, and it was great to learn from them. And so it was a 12-month program, and at the end of it, I was able to complete about 2,000 hours of supervised clinical experience. And my clinical work included, learning how to do applied behavior analysis. So basically, this was a new skill that I learned. So the internship site trained me on this particular therapy, and I was able to then provide early intervention services to children with autism, children with and persons with intellectual disabilities as well. So I got to do also a lot of psychological evaluations. Mostly they were cognitive and developmental. So so basically like IQ tests and other developmental things like the Vineland and other that check for adaptive functioning and daily living skills and things like that. And then, of course, I also ran a psychoeducational group and a social skills group for adults with developmental disabilities. And this was on what they called the day hub program, or the day habilitation program that they had for those adults. So this particular experience was highly stressful for me. And sometimes I'm just like, was that trauma, or was it burnout, or what was it? Because it's really not easy working with the particular population I was working with. So by the time I was finishing my internship, that's when the internship site got the license for a mental health clinic. But before that, I was working purely with persons with developmental disabilities. So these are people, with autism, ADHD, intellectual disabilities, and the like. And it definitely wasn't easy, and it was a very heavy workload, as well as really high stress levels. And so one of my greatest takeout was basically learning how to do self-care, and just kind of doing things that were very relaxing to me and very helpful to me, but also practicing self-compassion, because I was a student, I still am a student, and I'm always learning. So just learning to accept mistakes and also learn from them as well. And then one of the very, very key things I learned was supervision for skills training, or for learning. So I found that very great as well. So I'm just going to go over some comparisons, just a few comparisons about clinical experience in Kenya versus in the U.S. So in Kenya, in my experience, I did a couple of in practicums. Is that the sites in Kenya have very few of them have structures for graduate students, actually for all students actually. And so I put one that actually does have a structure, and that's the Kenyatta National and Referral Hospital. I haven't worked there, but I've heard that it has a very, very good training structure for students. But I feel like the other places just do not have this structure yet. So where students know that when they get in, they have kind of seminars, they have clinical supervision, they have some kind of competencies that they're supposed to fulfill. So this is largely lacking in a lot of the sites. Actually, if anything, for you as the graduate student, you're bringing in the structure and you're bringing in the kind of documentation and helping them out with setting up a department, for example. There was a site I worked at for practicum, and I had to set up the department for psychology. And I think a few of my colleagues have already mentioned that graduate students or highly trained psychologists are quite few in Kenya. So that could also be part of the reason. And of course, in the US, they do have regulatory bodies like APIC, and they do have APIC being the Association of Psychology Postdoctoral Internship Centers, and then they have also APA accredited sites. And so what really helps with the US is that these particular sites set standards and are able to monitor these sites. Are they providing students with the training that they're supposed to have? Are they providing students with the supervision? Are the students actually learning from that experience and gaining clinical skills as well? So that was a very big difference that I noted. Another difference was that Kenya, basically quality services are available to those who can afford. So if you're not able to afford high quality mental health services, then that means you get poor quality services or no services at all. And what I found in the US is that services are available to most, of course not all, because there's still many people who are homeless or people who come from different demographics that are not able to get these services. But I found that part of my work was actually to work in the projects, of where I would go into the projects and I would deliver the services. And I found that quite interesting, because I was like, oh, this is really nice. The services are available to this demographic as well. And in Kenya, I found the graduate students are generally older. And of course, we have to balance between working full time and being in school. And sometimes, so you're not always constantly able to, put your focus on one thing. You kind of have to find a balance between those two. Of where in the US, and this is just based on my experience, I found that graduate students are generally younger and have more opportunities for fellowships and scholarships to help them complete their graduate studies. I feel like scholarships are still something that graduate students in this particular part of the world it is there, but there are less opportunities for it. So from my experience, I gained a lot of professional skills, some of which were psychological evaluation skills, mastery in applied behavior analysis therapy, which is mostly used for persons with autism spectrum disorder, but it can also be applied really to any situation, or to anyone who behaves, or any animal that behaves. And then there's a broadened my knowledge in the knowledge base on neurodevelopmental disorders, and also cross-cultural competence in offering services, because where I worked, it was a team of the clinic actually served the Chinese American population. And so there were a whole bunch of people coming in. We had Chinese Americans, there were African Americans, there were Africans. So constantly having to work with translators and working with people from different different parts of the world really gave me very good experience, and also differential and dual diagnosis, because you would find that probably someone would come for an evaluation, and I would be able to diagnose them with an intellectual disability, but they probably also had a co-occurring disorder of depression or anxiety or something. Then, of course, there were skills for working in a multidisciplinary team. And I was also able to learn to use protocols in emergency situations. For example, in cases of suicide, there were a lot of cases of where the patient would become violent towards the clinician. And so you would have to follow a certain protocol for that. The recommendations that I would make is that, just based on my experience, that psychology sites in the United States that admit international students such as myself should be cognizant of the fact that the students are going through a acculturation or acculturation. And of course, acculturation has a lot of stress attached to it. So the culture shock comes through not just going to a different country, but also a different different work culture, because every organization has their own work culture. And so I think that's something that they would really need to be cognizant of, and just being quite supportive to these students and culturally sensitive. And I think also it's important that African students in the diaspora just be able to familiarize themselves with the acculturation processes, because I feel that a lot of times you can find that you're very excited to have this new experience, and then you get there and it's like, okay, everything is different, from the way people socialize, the way people learn. Everything is different. So I think that it's very important that graduate students do this. Also, universities in Africa offering psychology and other mental health programs should strive to collaborate with other institutions and internship sites. I think that we all have something to learn from each other. We could always do knowledge exchanges. I think that people from the US have a lot to learn from Africa and the way we do our thing, and the same that Africans have something to learn from professionals in the US as well. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Bernice, for that presentation. Dr. Brown, let me ask by way of just, if there's a way, do you have any insights, for example, about what research in psychology and the experience has been for you?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Gathua. I hope everyone enjoyed those talks as well. I'm always personally inspired by the work that our alumni and our current graduate students are doing here in Kenya. It's really, really always, I enjoy learning so much about their experiences. But yeah, as was mentioned, I'm a cognitive psychologist by training. And so I've had the privilege over the past few years of running the Center for Cognitive and Developmental Research, which some of our panelists have worked in and helped me collect data on various projects. And so one challenge that I've been faced with is when the opportunity was presented to me to get this laboratory started, this is one of the things that drew me to this area, because I'd love to see research productivity increase in this area. There's just a lot of exciting things for psychologists here to be sharing in terms of research, but the productivity hasn't always been there, as you mentioned. One of the biggest challenges I've found is that there's just very few psychological science laboratories here. So even when I was getting my facility started, it was sometimes a challenge to even describe what type of resources I need, what kind of space I need, because it was a newer concept. Most people were familiar with field-based work or specifically just clinical or counseling work, which we've seen is so important. But a couple areas that I think have the potential to have a really big impact are, one is through embracing open science practices. So through greater transparency in research and easier accessibility to literature, which is going to happen through open access publishing, I do think that will play a big role in increasing productivity. And then second, I know this will take time, but I think expanding psychology training and programs to other areas.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brown, for that. Thank you also for talking about the research. And you're right. I think the team has done a great job. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions. The way you've been able to give your perspectives about psychology in Kenya from where you sit is really going to begin to open the eyes of the world about what is happening in this part of the world regarding psychology. I know we're very passionate. So thank you everyone so much. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you everyone who's watching this for your